Well, thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Laura, for having me be a part of this. I've certainly enjoyed our conversation so far. And thanks to all of you who are here in Washington. Obviously, it's important to be involved, and you are showing a high degree of dedication by being here this week. And I'm particularly glad that you've had such pretty weather while you were here. But it does seem like a good, cool night for a baseball game. So I know that's after me, and that will probably be much more enjoyable than me, although if Laura had offered you beer, this may go better. As you already know, relationships are the currency around this town. The administration wants to have good relationships with your sector, and as Kelly has alluded to, I feel like we've already gotten off on the right foot in that regard. I met with them and a number of your leaders at the fly-in they did a few weeks ago, and we really enjoyed the conversation. I have to start by saying, though, I'm sure if you looked on the agenda, you might have thought, wow, the last person I would have expected to see at the Organic Trade Association conference is somebody from the Trump administration. And true to form, looking on your program, I am the last person that you're going to hear from while you're here for your meetings with the Organic Trade Association. So maybe some of that makes sense. But I hope you'll consider me a member of the family and an extension of a resource for you here in this town. I want to be helpful to you and your sector, and to the extent that I'm charged on the National Economic Council and asked by my boss, Gary Cohn, how is it that we move the economic needle for agriculture? You're a part of that conversation. You've been doing that on your own. We've got more of that to do, and we want to be a part of that. Visiting here and you giving up time away from your businesses and your operations and your family as a part of that, so I appreciate that you are investing this time and being here. Speaking of relationships, I feel like I should compliment Secretary Perdue, who I understand some of your group may meet with literally in the next 48 hours. You should know the President has an extreme amount of confidence in Secretary Perdue. He was literally in the session that I just attended over on the Hill, and seeing him operate, there are a couple of things. Obviously, I'm excited that there's a person that understands agriculture and that can hit the ground running, talking about farms and growing things on day one. But I also think he's just amazing to watch as a person. He has a great skill about himself, a great ease about himself. And maybe I just like having another Southern accent here in town. And maybe I'm the only person that understands him, but I do feel like he's a smooth operator and is a person that is really, on behalf of our sector, going to do a great job. So hats off to him. It's also an honor for me to serve in this role at the White House. I would note that this position's not always been filled, and certainly not always been filled this early in an administration. I hope that is an indication of the seriousness with which this administration takes the agricultural sector. So you have this voice, let's make sure that we use it. And I think there are other folks on the team that I should mention. For those of you that have worked in an administration before, you know it's not just about getting the policy right, but it's also about getting the personnel right. And it's about finding time to find personnel who will push on those policy issues that are most important to us. Those people include Secretary Perdue, who I've mentioned. I would also mention USTR Ambassador Lighthizer, who has hit the ground running working on our issues. If you were to go back and watch his testimony before the Senate Finance Committee, or if you were to read his responses to the questions that the members sent him on the record, agriculture, I could have brought it with me. It makes a nice prop. Agriculture is mentioned like 30 or 40 times in both the questions and then, of course, in his responses. And he says all of the things that our industry would have wanted him to say. So we're lucky to have him on the team, and now lucky finally that he's in place. I would also give kudos to my boss, not just because he's my boss, but because I've been in conversations with Gary Cohn, the director of the National Economic Council, where I have prepared what I thought were the right talking points for the conversation, and then all of a sudden he says something and goes totally off script, and everybody else in the room's like, yeah, that's right. And I'm like, wait, that's not what I said, and he's way ahead of me. So this is a guy that is a former commodity trader. He understands the economic side of agriculture, and I think he also gets the political side. And I will use this phrase later in my remarks, but I will say I believe as a sector, agriculture on the whole, particularly in this administration, I think we are going to, and I've used this phrase before, punch above our weight. While we may be small in numbers and perhaps compared to some sectors of the economy not as flashy as them, we certainly have a lot of bang for our buck when it comes to the attention and the political pressure that I think our sector and our entities can put forward. I need to avoid trying to list everyone, but I think it's also great that we have a vice president from the 8th most agriculturally significant state in the country, from Indiana. He is a friend of agriculture, and he and his staff have already demonstrated a willingness to sit down and work out issues and engage on ag issues that we find important. With that said, we have work to do, and so I was asked to talk a little bit about what do we see as the priorities. To the extent that we've developed an agriculture policy punch list, what are the first few items on that list? And I believe they personally fall into about 4 major buckets. The first of those is promoting agricultural trade. I think it's clear that you have not seen an administration talk about trade as much as you've seen this administration talk about trade, at least in my lifetime. Given the American farmer's impressive ability to produce much more than we consume here, to the extent that we are going to grow that economic factor, that economic measure of our sector, we have got to export more of what we are growing. And so the President is committed to both negotiating and renegotiating deals that do that, and that do that with agriculture in mind. I think the President fully understands that we are a contributor to the lessening of the deficit that we overall have as a trading partner, and he recognizes that we bring the side of that equation closer to where he wants that to be. To use his terminology, and I feel like I ought to I've spent part of my time going out and chatting with ag groups, having ag groups come in to the White House and talk about the fact that ag's gains on trade are not going to be given up or traded for other sectors' gains. So to the extent that that's a concern of this group or any other agricultural organization, I don't think it's a valid one. To use the President's terminology, agriculture already helps us win in the race to trade more, and we just want to make sure we continue to win. Speaking specifically to the organic sector, I think we need to think through how do we strengthen and how do we enforce our harmonization agreements and our understandings. We want to be an advocate for you on that. We do not want our trading partners to use their organic standards or their labeling tools as a trading advantage at the cost of our American organic producers. So to put a finer point on that, you can applaud. I won't hold that again. To put a finer point on that, I would say our agenda is not just about market access and signing new agreements, but it's also about standards, processes, and settlement mechanisms that allow us to resolve differences that we believe may sometimes put our farmers at a competitive disadvantage. Protecting your label is specifically important to us. You have earned a reputation. These numbers behind me did not happen on their own. You've earned a reputation. Folks recognize what your label means. And so the last thing we want to do is to allow other people to come in and loot that label. If they want to earn it, welcome to the club. We're happy to compete. But if they are going to somehow water that down, we want to know about that, because those are conversations we want to bring up with them and to face them about. So trade, clearly identifying new markets, where can we expand access, but also making sure we have fairer deals and that we enforce the deals that we have already agreed to. Number 2, providing farmers with a reliable, affordable workforce. There's no way that me coming and speaking to the Organic Trade Association with media in the room at a place called the museum and then talking about immigration and ag labor, there's no way that could go poorly, I assure you. With that said, I would just say, we have talked about this issue in ag for a long time. I have my own theories about why it has not yet happened, but those of us in agriculture know we need some relief. We need to do something about this, and we need to use common sense. I've shared this story one other time, so forgive me if you're hearing it a second time and it's redundant. But a few weeks ago, I was walking out of the West Wing to go back to the what we call the EEOB, the Executive Office Building there, and the person who was responsible for the groundskeeping, he was out watering these baskets of begonias, these window boxes that hang on the west windows of the West Wing. And they're absolutely gorgeous, as you can imagine. They're like a foot tall. They're spilling over. Clearly, they need a lot of water. And so he's hooking up this hose as I go in for a meeting. When I come back out, he's still in the process of watering these begonias. And he had hooked his hose to a spigot that pops up out of the ground. And what I observed once he turned it on was that apparently it was not attached correctly. and apparently he was already frustrated with having to fiddle with it a few times. And so when he turned it on, water started spraying out of the spigot. Now, there was some water coming out of the end of the hose, so he could still use the hose, but he had this problem that everyone that tried to walk in and out of the West Wing was going to be sprayed with water. And I'm sure some folks might say that's not such a bad thing, but I mean, these are not me, but some other important people walk in and out of this door. Cabinet secretaries, the vice president uses this door, and I think he was pretty self-conscious about creating a little sprinkler for us to run through when we went in and out of meetings. Although my daughter would enjoy something like that, that would probably be her highlight. But it was apparent he had been fiddling with it a while, because you could see this look of frustration on his face, and he grabbed his hat and he just put it over the spigot that was spraying out. So that then caused the water to spray up in the hat and just run down on the ground right around the spigot. Problem solved, right? So he noticed that I was watching this. I think I'm the only guy at the White House from Sampson County that would have found something like this humorous from down on the farm. And I was actually pretty pleased at his ingenuity and his willingness to sacrifice his own attire to get the begonias watered. So I smiled at him, and he could tell I was watching. He smiled back, and I said, I think you're going to be all right. I think this is going to work out. And so we shared this good laugh, this funny moment. But I say all that to say, and I really want to make this point, I think it's a good illustration. It is, in fact, a true story. I promise this happened. But it's also a good illustration of what we've done on the ag labor issue for many years. We've sort of covered up some of the symptoms of the problem. We've covered up when people are getting wet or getting sprayed or being annoyed by the problem, and we sort of want to pretend it's been fixed, and that's just not the case. And again, to the extent that the National Economic Council is charged with answering the question of how do we make your segment grow, or how do we let your segment grow? We don't make it grow. How do we give you the room to operate that allows you to increase your productivity and grow your sales, whether it's here or elsewhere? Then solving this problem has got to be a part of that conversation. So I can tell you that's an economic challenge that we see. It's an economic challenge that we intend to deal with, and it will be the input of folks like those in this room that help us solve that problem. So we want your help, we want your views on that, and we want you at the table. The third thing I would say is the regulatory onslaught. That may be a word that's a little too strong for you, but for years, I think our farmers and ranchers at least have the impression and the feeling that they've been the victim of one regulatory proposal after another. So you've seen now the president issue a number of executive orders that relate to regulatory reform. The original one was not agency specific, but that directed agencies to create a regulatory reform officer to take a look at how we could address this issue. The one I'm more excited about is the one that the president signed on the day of the Farmer Roundtable. On April 25th, Tuesday, April 25th, the president hosted 15 farmers from across the U.S. One of them was an organic farmer from California in the Roosevelt Room. And one of the pieces or the outcomes of that meeting was that the president signed an executive order which directed the Secretary of Ag to conduct a 180-day review of regulations that are impacting the agriculture industry and to try to discern places across agencies, not just at USDA, but at EPA, DOL, Department of Interior, or elsewhere, where there are regulatory hamperings, if you will, with regard to our economic growth. And again, to be responsible there, I think the touchstone of this analysis on regulatory reform is not just simply that regs are bad, we need less regulation. It is, what are the regulations that are an economic barrier to success in your sector that we can responsibly move or remove and lower your cost of production while still being responsible to whatever the original policy was for that regulation in the first place. All those kinds of retrospective and prospective reviews, I believe, are important, and certainly that's an active process. You need to plug into that. USDA will be the lead on that. Secretary Perdue is chairing that task force. I believe their first meeting will occur in the next 2 or 3 weeks at USDA, but there will be a way for you to weigh in on that and for your leaders here in D.C. to do that, and I would encourage you to do that. I'm familiar with some of your challenges in that context, certainly not all of them, but the national list, as you call it, I know you have some headaches there. Dairy pricing, which I had no idea. I mean, to me, dairy pricing in America is about the most complicated ag policy issue known to mankind. In fact, when I taught ag and food law for 5 years, I just told my students, here's a CRS report on dairy, go read it, and I won't ask you anything about it as long as you don't ask me anything about it. It is complicated, right? But add on top of that the organic sector. and the fact that it's costing you more to get to that gallon of milk. And so you've somehow got to plug into that highly regulated system, and I just understand, and I won't pretend to know all the details, but I know that's something we need to sit down and have more conversations about, and I hope we will. Transition acreage certification, I know that's a big deal. Your folks didn't mention it to me, but I would be shocked if everyone in this room was thrilled with how we're doing on FSMA implementation so far. I'm hearing a few groans. I would think your sector of all of the players in the ag world, you have some very unique needs there, and we need to make sure they're addressed in a way that, again, gets to the policy of the underlying legislation in food safety and making sure consumers are kept safe. But in addition to that, making sure we're allowing you to do that at a price point that remains for you to be profitable and that does, in fact, actually make sense and improve consumer safety. So again, the touchstone there is, are there barriers to economic growth that we can responsibly remove or at least lower the cost of implementing? And last but not least, ag will be a part of the infrastructure conversation. And I have to be careful what I promise on infrastructure, because I think in this town when we talk about infrastructure, everybody's mind goes to, we're going to spend $1 trillion. So that's a Christmas tree. We're going to hang ornaments all over it. Every member that's got a project in their district will get some. And then there'll just be a check writing party and we'll go around and cut ribbons. That's not exactly what we've got in mind. I do believe there will be an investment on behalf of the federal government in infrastructure, and a targeted one. But part of that investment will not just be dollars. Part of that investment will also be looking at the regulatory process and the costs of new projects and the costs that are added to projects based on that regulatory structure, and saying, can we, again, responsibly move some of those things out of the way so that that project in your community can move forward faster, can move forward at a lower rate of cost, and that can be built and put into operation more quickly so that we get the economic benefit of that. That will not be easy. None of these things will in fact be easy, but I hope certainly this is more than lip service. We're sincere about making progress on these things. When I come to work each day, it is my goal to make progress in each of these 4 core areas, and if I didn't think we were going to be able to do that, I wouldn't be here. We want to deliver. We want to punch above our weight in the ag sector, and I think we're well on our way to doing that. 2 final illustrations, and I will close. They are largely personal, just points of observation. I grew up on a farm in southeast North Carolina. Was not a large farm, but that was the only thing my parents, both parents, did to earn a living, was farm. I'm the son of an 80-year-old farmer and a brother to one as well. Well, he's not an 80-year-old farmer, but he's my brother. You know what I mean? He's kind of in that in-between between bragging about his youth and bragging about his old age. So he's definitely older than me, but we don't talk about it anymore. But I promised myself, because I'd watched them year after year go to meetings where elected officials were asked to give comments, were asked to weigh in on this or that, and I promised myself that I would never go to these kinds of meetings and just spout out statistics and act like I'm one of y'all and then walk out of the room and not really do anything about it. So number one, I want you to understand I have a sincere, inbred desire to help this industry. And I see organic absolutely at the table and a part of that growth. You've done well. We need to do better. But I do want to share one statistic, and that's the number 3. That's how many kids that my parents, on their average size farm in southeast North Carolina, raised and put through college with their hard work on that farm. That same size, and trust me, some of them took longer to get through college than others. I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about one of my brothers. My other brother, that same size farm today would not put 3 kids through college. There's a lot going on, I understand, that leads to that conclusion and gets us to that result. But the takeaway is that we have lost ground as farmers relative to the last generation that was able to make that kind of money and in those kinds of investments in their children. So we've got work to do. I believe this sector is a part of that. I believe the president recognizes that. I believe the secretary recognizes that, and I know that you recognize that. So my last illustration is being down in Sampson County a few weekends ago, and it's still hard for me to come back up here. I haven't been in D.C. very long, and so when I get back home, particularly when I get my mother's cooking, it's really difficult to come back. But I had the opportunity to take my 7-year-old daughter out to a local strawberry farm to pick strawberries. It was obviously a fun task. She had a blast. It was a beautiful day, almost like today, almost too cool to be comfortable. And after I settled up there at the little stand where you pay at this place called Bunce's Strawberries, and trust me, I was the one settling up, even though my mom went with me and also got like a big container of strawberries. That just proves farmers really are smarter than lawyers. I settled up, and the man that was taking the money, he kind of looked at me. And I could tell he wanted to say something, but he was kind of hesitant to say anything. And so I tried to make myself look as inviting as possible. And he finally said, and there's a little side point I need to make here, my father goes by the name MF. So that's a story for another day, okay? It stands for Merd Franklin. And if you found that funny, I'm really not sure why, because I don't find anything funny about it. But he looked at me, and again, we'll cover that one maybe next year. But he looked at me straight in the eye, and he said, "Are you that boy of MF's that's up there with Trump?" And I immediately felt my mouth go dry, right? We've had some security orientation at the White House, but nobody's really offered training on a right way to answer this question when you're out and you know nothing about the person that's asking it, right? So you don't know if they're about to bear hug you or about to let the air out of your tires. So it's kind of like, I mean, there's really like lose-lose, right? It's like when the cop stops you and he says, "Do you know how fast you were going?" I mean, what are you supposed to say? "No, tell me," or "Yeah, I know." I mean, there's really no right answer. I mean, you should just say, "I didn't think I was going fast at all, sir." But you never know in this environment, and particularly now as people are very passionate about politics, you never know whether saying how you would answer that question, whether it would get you scolded or get you praised. I mentioned my two older brothers. The thought did cross my mind. People confuse us all the time. And so I did think about saying, "No, that's my other brother." With all that said, let me be clear. I'm honored to be a part of the president's team. I'm honored to be a part of the administration. And I know that means sometimes facing the music of band members who aren't necessarily playing on the same page of music. So I said, "Yes, sir, I work for the president." And he paused for a second for what seemed like an eternity. Again, I didn't know anything about his politics. I still don't know anything about his politics. And he said, "Put in a good word for us while you're up there." And I had never been so relieved in all my life, but in another way, it really weighed heavy on me that there's a lot of people back home counting on all of us who never make these trips, who never come to D.C., who don't belong to a trade association, but they're earning a living in agriculture, and they want us to put in a good word for them. And so tomorrow you're going to have a chance to go to the Hill and to put in a good word, and I would encourage you to do that and to keep this man's advice in mind. So with that, I'm happy to take some questions. If we've got time, it would be great if we don't, but if we do, I'm happy to take questions. So. All right, hearing none, well, he's ready. He's ready.
Well, thank you for being here and your dedication to being aware of farming issues and farming issues in the South.
Sure.
So a couple things. One, as somebody that started farming organically in '73, there wasn't any support for organic agriculture. And that fact, we grew this industry really without very little support until very recently, in terms of context of decades. And so a couple of things. One, it's a voluntary program. So when you talk about loosening regulatory hurdles and stuff like that, while I can empathize with it, if you don't want to be a part of the organic program, and it's that dance of maintaining consumer confidence and standards and trust in the label, that's how we grew it. And so if you don't want to be a part of it, nobody's forcing you.
Yeah, if I can jump in, I want to clarify. I want to make sure I understand. I get that about your voluntary program, and to the extent that I'm talking about regulatory reform, that's not the kind I'm talking about. I'm talking about outside your specific program, to the extent that there are regs on anything from transportation to the interface you may now have under FSMA with FDA. Those are things I really want us to think about lessening the burden on you.
Well,
so fair point.
Okay,
yeah,
and
I'm glad we made that distinction.
I hope that comprehensive immigration reform may be one of them, because that may be a little bit I mean, it may be more difficult, but as opposed to expanding guest worker programs that haven't really been serving the guest workers well, although they do come and they get money and they go back. But there's problems with guest worker programs, and I'm sure you're well aware of them. Who makes more money? The people down in Mexico signing up the folks that are coming, all that kind of stuff. And then I will say that research, you must know the value of research, and so one of the things that the federal government has done is invest in research. There's a marker bill out now to look at expanding the amount of research for organic, which would help more rural community farmers and conventional farmers then feel like that they do have support and research support to enter into a market that has been paying farmers a better price and a fairer price. And so I would hope that. And then I think the final point that I want to make, I'm curious as to whether the administration will support the increase, for example, in ORI, the ORI program, that the marker bill that's coming. There hasn't been a companion bill in the Senate, but I'm hopeful that there will be. But, the National Organic Program, you guys, the president's budget, I believe, decreased it. And so when you feel like that there's approximately 48 people total in the program, $50 billion a year, that each person, the return on investment of the National Organic Program is about $1 billion per staff member, and yet they can't keep up with it. Right now, organic imports are taking the place of what could be domestically grown product in the marketplace. If we were to scale up and give U.S. farmers a chance to get to know how to do organic production, to get through the barriers of entering into the market, it would be a economic boon for U.S. farmers in eastern North Carolina. I mean, or it could be U.S. grains coming to do it, as opposed to the story on the Washington Post recently about imported grains. But the supply side on this side of the pond doesn't meet the demand. And so, I would encourage the president, and I would encourage you to look at investing more into organic, not cutting the National Organic Program, so that maybe more U.S. farmers can benefit from the opportunity.
Great, thank you. I will respond to that briefly, or try to respond briefly. Let me start by saying I hear you. I know that statistic out of the University of California at Davis that talks about investments in agricultural research leveraging a different dollar amount, and I think it ranges, whenever they do the survey, from anywhere from $17 to $23 per dollar invested. So that's important. Let me speak, though, because I know this is a question that will come up more directly, even if you don't interpret it to have come up that directly then. I do want to say, and I'm not afraid to say, a word or two about the president's budget. And let me say three things, really, if I can, about that. I think, number one, I want you to understand that this president is serious about a budget, at least over a 10-year window, that balances and that doesn't leave us in the situation we're in now, which is $70,000 of debt per individual. So at my household alone, $210,000 that essentially is being spent that we don't have, or that we haven't raised or taken from somebody. That is a serious issue. Economists will tell you that's a serious issue, and this president, I think, is serious about addressing that. So moving beyond that, I think the president also said on the campaign trail that his priorities would be addressing that and also ensuring the safety and security of Americans. So to the extent that money or dollars are moved around, keeping within that framework I just mentioned, clearly that's been a priority of the president's proposal. I would add to that, though, that I do believe it's fair to have a conversation about getting more with the same or getting more with the less. I know that's not the only answer. But I think that's a question we ought to ask ourselves, and I think that's a question we ought to give the folks running some of the programs across government an opportunity to experiment with. Let me end that by saying I personally expect, and I think I may have actually already used these words with Kelly, I expect the folks that are involved in this conversation to do what you need to do to protect your interest. I expect you to educate. I expect you to advocate. I expect you to make your voice known on the Hill. And hopefully at the end of the day, we can find a way to start in different places, but still end up with a result that serves the best interest of American agriculture and of your sector as a part of that. So that's kind of the beginning and the end of my comments on the budget. But thank you for the question. Good feedback. Other questions?
You can do one more. Mr. Starling, thank you so much for coming. I'm with Organic Valley, which is a dairy cooperative based in Wisconsin. We represent, we're owned by over 2,000 farmers. We've been working here at the Policy Conference for many years, and we've worked with the USDA extensively with, going onto the Hill. One of the things that I'm excited about hearing from you is your role on the National Economic Council, and I'm hoping that you can stay engaged. I hate to ask you for something after you're so kind to come here, but if you can stay engaged with us, because I think that you've already identified both through the dairy pricing through your comments about regulatory help and enforcement, I think you're seeing that with some targeted efforts, we can really move the organic industry forward. And so with your engagement there, like speaking from just the co-op's perspective on the dairy pricing, I keep saying that, we can bring $20 million to our bottom line with a change in this regulatory effort. So that's a lot for our farmers, and it would be incredible, and that would spread beyond to other organic dairy companies. So I'm hoping that you can stay engaged with us, and I know Secretary Perdue will absolutely take the lead, but having the White House involved, having the National Economic Council involved will, I think, really help move the dime on some of these things that have taken a little bit of time. And so I'm really encouraged with you.
Yeah, let me add to that, because I think there's a way you can help me be more helpful. It's DC, right? So what has been amazing to me since coming to the White House is, when I was a staffer on the Hill, I fully expected to have a lot of meetings where a group came in once a year. They shared their priority documents. They said, we just want you to be aware of this. We just want you to know if this comes up for a vote where, we want your boss to be with us. And it was this real soft sell because I was in the Senate, right? So it's the Senate. So anyway, we'll leave that there. I think this role is very different. So what helps me is when the Organic Trade Association, and Laura has done this, after we had our meeting, I said to them very specifically, I need your punch list. I need to know chapter and verse specifically, what do you feel like's tying your hands? What do you think's doable? What can we be helpful to your sector in? Bring that to me. Let's have a conversation about it. We don't need to have a meeting. We don't need to bring 10 people in. We don't need to, partly because of just clearing security and all that stuff is a bit of a headache. But let's get the list, because there may be things off the list that I can tell you immediately we'll absolutely be interested in pushing that. We may need some sort of process within the White House. We may need some process across the administration. But that's what's most helpful to me. Chapter, verse, specific ideas, not a general nudge that, hey, can you help us out? But this is the reg that's bothering me, or this is the challenge I've got. This is where I think we're being treated unfairly by our trading partners, or whatever that complaint or that issue is. Bring it in. Let's take a look at it. And for better or for worse, I'll be honest with you about whether I think we can make progress there.
Well, we're out of time, so help me thank Rafe Starling.
You bet. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, I'm going to try this again. I think we're at the top of the ninth. Is that right? Did I do bottom, top, right? We're almost done, almost there. Oh, we're at the bottom. See? I really tried. Anyway, okay, I'm gonna wrap it up for you folks. So first of all, I'd just like to thank our sponsors, our silver sponsors. We've got Danone Wave here, our friends there. Elevation Burger. Let's give some rounds of applause to wake everybody up. Lehigh Valley Organic Growers, still in the room. Perdue Agribusiness, and Seeds of Change. Okay. What a day. I'm just exhausted listening to everybody, but I want to thank you all for being patient. I have a couple of housekeeping things to talk to you about real quick. Good luck tomorrow with the Hill visits. For those of you who have early meetings, Breakfast will be ready at 7 a.m., so please feel free to get there anytime after 7. It's at the Hall of States, right? Yep. Please arrive about 45 minutes before your first meeting so that you can get your packets and meet up with your team leaders and get over to where your meetings are first thing. I'd also really sincerely like to thank OTA staff. So staff, hello again out there. Wow. Every year. We all keep getting better and better and better. So thank you again. Have fun tomorrow. Good luck with your visits. It's been a great day. Ballpark game tonight. For those of you headed over there, have fun. And lastly, I just want to wrap up with the seed thing again. So all of you have these seeds. Many of us have been at this 30 plus years, right? Believe it or not. And these seeds to me kind of represent who we are, whether you've been at it as long as we have or whether you're the first timers that we recognized yesterday and today. So just a couple of facts about seeds that remind me of who we are and what we do and why we do it. A poppy seed, so there's some fun facts. A poppy seed can lie dormant for 50 years before it finally blooms. We're blooming, folks. It's not taken 50 years, but I think the time is right for us. We're moving, so thank you all. 1 ounce of celery seeds can produce an acre of celery. We are a tiny but mighty force, so let's go out there and get them, right? And then lastly, even if a seed is planted upside down, that seedling always turns itself right side up. And we've got headwinds. We know we have a lot of headwinds this year, but we're going to do the right thing, and we're going to get this industry to grow. So thank you very much. Have a great night. We'll see you tomorrow.